Good afternoon and welcome to the Fordham University Church. On behalf of Eileen Shore, Stephen Freedman's wife, his whole family, as well as our president, Father McShane, we are deeply grateful for your presence today in honoring the life of Stephen Freedman. We're grateful not only to those who join here in Rose Hill, but to those who are also joining us via live stream from Lincoln Center, from Westchester County, London, and other places. We're especially grateful today to have with us Rabbi Eleanor Smith from Chicago. Although she will say more about her relationship with Stephen, Eleanor was Stephen's rabbi for many years, and he always saw her as an important spiritual guide to him. Eleanor is also a physician practicing at Northwestern Medicine in Evanston, Illinois, and she will be leading our service today. So Eleanor, on behalf of Stephen's family and Father McShane, as well as the whole university, let me thank you really for coming here and sharing with us this very important moment. And we're grateful for your willingness to guide us through both our mourning as well as the ability to celebrate the life of this amazing man for whom we all have such love and affection. Before we begin, I would ask everyone to take this moment to turn off or silence all your cell phones or noise-emitting devices. And also, out of respect for the occasion, throughout the service, we request you not to take photographs. Although a university photographer will take a very few pictures to memorialize our gathering, we respectfully ask that you help in maintaining a prayerful atmosphere throughout this service. May I invite you please to stand.
Please be seated. I wish to begin by thanking Father McCarthy, both for his kind welcome and also for his intense and thoughtful collaboration with me in planning this sacred hour of memory together. On behalf of Stephen, his family, and Fordham, I thank you all for making the effort to be here today as we mourn, remember, and honor our beloved friend, colleague, husband, father, grandfather, and brother. Chief among the laws of Jewish mourning is what we call Nechum Avelim, bringing comfort to the mourners. And by your presence here today, in all the far and near pockets of the Fordham family, with both formal words, as we shall hear, and in humble silences, you lovingly fulfill this charge. Many years ago, I had the privilege to be Stephen's rabbi, but I am here today mostly as a symbol of the love and respect that Fordham wishes to show this towering brother in faith and intellect. Stephen was proudly Jewish, as we all know, and his ascendant decades in Jesuit academia only seemed to enhance and refine this part of who he was. So I am here to embroider our goodbye with the melodies and words that our people has used for generations to remember who we are, to welcome back the soul to its creator, and as a meager balm to the heartbreak of death. Mourning is a hand for which there is no glove. It's a raw and surreal state of being that moves to its own rhythm and bows to no rituals or timelines. Today we are at least raw together, and in that there is some comfort. I remember my friend Stephen like a geode, an unassuming thing of nature whose full splendor and complexity were evident the more you got to see inside. And he was so generous in the way he shared all that was inside of him, both his intellect and his heart. Although I first knew Stephen as a congregant, our real friendship began when I spent 2 years at Loyola in Chicago doing a post-baccalaureate program during the time that Stephen was dean there. Although I knew it wasn't so, he was present to me as if the main part of his job as dean was looking after me and my learning. He made time for me whenever I came by his office, mostly without an appointment. He introduced me to every single nun on campus, and they knew and loved each other. He took me to lunch with a Jesuit priest in Chicago who had become a physician. He didn't introduce us through email or suggest that we meet by phone. He took a half day out of the office to drive with me an hour away, have lunch with Dr. Sheehan, stay for a tour, and be part of a rich and leisurely conversation about faith and medicine. And then we drove an hour back, like that was his job. He held my call to medicine with me and lovingly shepherded me through his neck of the woods, and he is partly responsible for that dream coming to life. In the untethered thinking of the sorrowing mind, I have looked forward to today as if I would see Stephen again. And in a sense, I will, through the words of love and memory that we will hear today, beginning now with Dean Badowska.
To Stephen's family, Eileen, Zach, and Noah, thank you for the gift of being able to speak about Stephen today. He was my mentor and my friend, and I miss him terribly. A few days after Stephen died, I received an email from a department chair with an impromptu eulogy, calling to mind the unique way Stephen had of asking, "How are you today? How are you holding up?" The slight break from the cadence and intonation of the typical "how are you" was partly a mark of his foreignness, which he alternately underlined and effaced. We bonded around this incomplete assimilation, the fervid ambition to pass, the inevitable failure. But this "how are you today" was not just impatience with social rituals. Stephen was intense, and he really wanted to know. When he asked, "Eva, how are you holding up today?" it was as though the world paused for a precious moment, and his eyes settled on me alone. It was complete, undivided, focused attention. I know he gave it to many of you, but when his eyes were on you, there was nobody else. Stephen revered what we at Fordham called a whole human person. It is how he lived his life. When we met for our regular meetings, he wanted to know, did you sleep enough? Did you eat? He asked unabashedly personal, direct questions, challenged me to strive for deep and authentic personal and professional fulfillment. At my last evaluation on June 26, he told me to get out my notebook because he was going to dictate something important. Don't be so hard on yourself. And he listened voraciously, leaning forward from the black leather couch in his office, listening with his whole being. Every aspect of his posture signaled openness. He listened not in order to make me feel heard. He absorbed what I said to him. It mattered. It was almost as though in those conversations you could see how it is possible that the flapping of butterfly wings in Brazil could indeed cause a tornado in Texas. Stephen listened because he was humble. Smart as all get out, he knew he didn't have all the answers. In talking to him, I felt that I, in my particular context, on a particular day, with my particular history and human makeup, that I fully existed for him, and I was fully seen. Stephen wanted those whom he mentored to remain vulnerable, show those ruffled feathers, expose that growing edge. It wasn't just that he was an evolutionary biologist. He was a profoundly developmental and relational leader. He led by conversation, not by memoranda. I don't remember how, and I don't know why he became my mentor. It was as though his blind belief settled on me and created talents I didn't know I could have. Like a parent cheering a toddler to make the wobbly first steps, he cheered on as I made my green forays into leadership. He pushed and prodded, queried my decisions. "Are you sure, Eva? Are you really sure?" Oh, this question always undid me, because it actually reassured me. He didn't so much care that the next step should be perfectly right. He cared that I should have thought about it. He wanted, as he said, to see fire in the belly, but he had no patience for unquestioned self-confidence or unanalyzed certainty. Instead, he asked only for the growing edge, marveled at what felt like the concentric growth rings of a tree. When I found on July 3rd that he died, the first thing that came to mind was that we wouldn't go to Hawaii after all. He used to say to me, "Will you visit me when I'm on the beach in Hawaii?" He never talked about retirement. I laughed at him. He was just about the last person who could sit quietly on a beach, relaxing with fruity tropical drinks. And anyway, he was into red wine. But the idea of that beach, which came back like some cryptic symbolic shorthand, represented a future beyond the here and now, beyond our relationship as provost and dean, or even mentor and student, in which we would have ample time to continue to ask each other, "Are you really, really sure?" Sometimes when we drifted too far afield, I'd say, "Stephen, we will talk about it in Hawaii." He'd smile in that inimitable way, and I knew he knew that I cherished and loved him as mentor and friend, because we would always both remain works in progress. So now you know while I'm wearing this fake Party City lei. If you look carefully at the photograph the university published on its homepage the day that Stephen died, you will see him at the podium on the steps of Keating Hall. And if you look closely, you will see a thin strip of pink peeking out from under his academic robe. That lei at first seemed to me incongruous, even vaguely improper, like a speck of unreason or ancient magic. What was this Jewish provost at a Jesuit Catholic university doing wearing a lei under his academic regalia? And he said, "This is to remind me that this is a happy day." He loved the symbolic aspects of academic life, all the pomp and circumstance of graduation day, voices amplified and filling Eddie's parade. But he did need to remind himself, to be recalled to this occasion. The last time we really hung out was at the FUV Highline Bash on May 11th. He loved FUV, and he knew how to party. Sitting right in front of the stage, he pulled out his phone and whispered, "I played hooky from work today." He went to the Met to see Heavenly Bodies. He scrolled through the pics on his phone, pointing out the sheer volume of a Dior gown, the edgy aesthetic of an Alexander McQueen. He liked beautiful things. And then he dragged me behind the stage because I was silly enough to let slip that I had a weakness for the lead guitarist of the record company. He didn't know him any better than I did, and he embarrassed me mightily. But he fervently believed that people should meet and know each other. And for nearly 2 months after, he kept telling me that we must find more time to dance. If he were here in body today, he'd ask, "How are you holding up today?" He'd be standing right in front of the altar, orchestrating the event, chatting up a storm, and through his very being encouraging you to be fully present. And Stephen, I see you, and I fully see you there.
Good afternoon. I'm John Pelissero. I'm the former provost at Loyola University, Chicago, where I first met my colleague and friend Stephen Freedman during the 1980s. We were both faculty members with offices in the same building, with many occasions for conversations and laughs at the escalator where he anchored his place in the building. What I will share with you today are remembrances from me and others at Loyola who were so fortunate to know Stephen and who send their condolences to Eileen, Noah, and Zach. He began his Loyola career in 1978 as an assistant professor of natural science, an undergraduate program whose mission was to teach science in the core curriculum to non-science majors. Stephen's mission was to get freshmen excited about science. He was the teacher for whom student learning was the ultimate goal of being a professor. According to legend, Stephen would get so enthusiastic during particular lectures that he would jump up and down on the instructor's desk, trying to make his point, trying to pass on to students his enthusiasm for science. Over a decade, he rose through the faculty ranks, achieving tenure, graduate faculty status, and promotion to professor. When he was up for tenure, his dean, Father Larry Biondi, described him as, quote, an extraordinary, exceptional young faculty member who has proven that he is an excellent teacher and a creative scholar of high value. Stephen was named chairperson of his department in 1990, and one of his colleagues, Professor JoBeth D'Agostino, told me that he was a very good chairperson and he was a superb mentor. He encouraged her and other faculty to just let love of science shine through and that students would respond, advice that she still follows. In 1994, I was asked to serve on the search committee for the new dean of Mundelein College, the adult learners school at Loyola. This was a national search in which Stephen wowed the search committee and impressed the chief academic officer with his passion for supporting part-time adult students. Many of his students were first generation, and he had abundant compassion for the challenges that these students often faced as they struggled to balance family, work, and college. Stephen invited me to serve on the Mundelein College Council, where I witnessed his leadership, vision, and his enthusiasm for adult education. As he often said with some measure of humor, according to Marion Claffey, who served as one of his assistant deans, he wanted adult education to be a, quote, happening thing, unquote. He loved administration and his leadership stood out time and again, including when he articulated to university leaders the social responsibility that Loyola had to address the Bosnian refugee presence near our campus. Stephen created the New Beginnings program, in which Bosnians were invited to the university to teach and complete degrees that had been interrupted by the war. Stephen and I continued our friendship after he left Loyola in 2002 to begin new leadership roles as chief academic officer at Gonzaga and then, of course, here at Fordham. As my own career advanced, I often sought his counsel on leadership within a university. Before I became provost, Stephen and I were having lunch in Chicago. I asked him what he thought were some effective strategies for leading the academic enterprise at the university. I still remember him saying that he always tried to avoid saying no. How do you do that, I said, if you're the provost? His view was that if you didn't have to respond with a no to a request, you had the opportunity to process a solution in a collaborative way. The end result might practically still be no, he said, but the other individual would believe that they had been heard and respected. And to him, this was the win-win approach to being a chief academic officer. And I would say it worked, as he served longer than most as a chief academic officer. Stephen was the longtime leader of the AJCU Chief Academic Officers Group. Each year, he would plan our meeting, and then he would consult us on where we should hold our next meeting, noting who had volunteered to host, telling us think about the options. And in a few hours, he announced his selection of where we would meet, again making us all believe that this was our consensus. Would-be hosts were never told no, but something like, and Linda, we'll look again at Lemoyne next year. I could share many stories of what we discussed over a glass of wine, which, by the way, took a very long time for Stephen to select and order during these hotel stays of our meetings. He once offered this advice when inevitably someone asked, "So how's your hotel room?" Stephen, who didn't always stay at the conference hotel with us, said this, "Well, when you check into the hotel, you should say to the desk clerk, 'Is this a good room? Or am I going to be back in 10 minutes asking for a better room?' Because I think I would save us both time and aggravation if you would give me the room now that you would give me later when I came down to demand a change." He had a great sense of humor. He also had the intensity about him that was discussed previously. He totally focused on the person he was with, overflowing with empathy and asking questions about how you were. Stephen's colleagues were also his friends. He knew about everyone's families, spouse and children's names, what they were involved in, and he always asked them with sincere interest in how they were. And if the family was in distress, Stephen was there for them. Again, his former colleague, Jo Beth, who's here today, said her family will always be grateful for the care and attention given by Stephen and Eileen as their family coped with the serious illness that affected her 5-year-old daughter. Stephen showed how deeply he cared for people in these times of stress. I recently talked to Stephen's former assistant dean, Jean Dolores Schmidt, BVM, better known as Sister Jean of Loyola basketball fame. I asked the 99-year-old if she had a good remembrance that I could share here today. She got a smile on her face immediately and said, "Oh, yes." To paraphrase her, When Stephen was named dean, I gave him a scouting report on Mundelein College. It was a typed list of 17 specific issues that he should address and included a number of academic issues and the names of staff who were underemployed, underperforming, or who should be cut from the team. Stephen looked at the list and told me that he would keep my report close to him. About a year later, Stephen produced a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket and showed Sister Jean her report in which he had checked off all 17 issues as being addressed. Sister Jean said she was not surprised. Stephen always respected my good advice. Stephen left us too soon, but I'm sure with a long list of items checked off that he had accomplished in his career. In closing, his friends at Loyola described the man in similar terms: enthusiastic and empathetic, compassionate and caring, focused and funny, loving and living life to the fullest. I admire so many aspects of this wonderful man who I'm grateful to have had in my life. Godspeed, Stephen.
The 23rd Psalm. Adonai roi lo echsar, binot asher yarbitzeni, al mei menuchot yinahaleni, nafshi yeshovel, yancheni b'moglei tzedek lema'an shemo. Gam ki elech begetz al mavet lo irara, ki ata imadi, shivtecha umishantecha, hema yenachamuni, ta'aroch lefanai shulchan neged sorerai, dishanta b'shemen roshi, kosi revaya, ach tov v'chesed yirdefuni, kol yemei chayai, v'shavti b'veit Adonai le'orech yamim. God is my shepherd, I shall not want. God makes me lie down in green pastures, leads me beside still waters, and restores my soul. You lead me in right paths for the sake of your name. Even when I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You have set a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of God forever.
Good afternoon. I'm Ellen Fahey-Smith, better known to many of you as one of Stephen's two key reports, along with Jonathan, of course. I am privileged and honored, if not saddened and a bit overwhelmed, to be here in celebration and remembrance of the life of our dear friend and colleague. So, let me ask, who among us believe that the founder of Fordham University, Archbishop John Hughes, envisioned Fordham's first provost to be a Jewish immigrant who spoke Yiddish and French before he ever uttered a word of English, and had a flair for fashion, food, and finery? But, or yet, or maybe it's Alleluia, those words do describe our beloved Stephen. Stephen loved to defy the odds, push the envelope, elicit a response. In a recent conversation, Tom Shergy and I were reminiscing about our dinners with Stephen. You've all heard a little bit about some of Stephen's dinners. Leading up to any dinner, Diane Cuomo might be asked to call the restaurant up to a half a dozen times or more to adjust the time of the reservation, check on table placement, wine selection, or a host of similar questions. It would not end there, however. Stephen would leave nothing to chance. He watched over every detail. If he hadn't yet been seated and spotted a more desirable table, he would casually wander over to the group of diners, hover a bit, and ask them if they were ready to leave, although clearly they were not. He may even suggest that they order dessert at the bar. He was always concerned about his guests, and he strived to provide a peak experience for all. That's how Stephen lived his life. Mind you, these positive attributes and deep care for others often led to all sorts of confusion, chaos, and frustrations. Structure, simplicity, and order were not his hallmark. Stephen could easily take the incredibly simple and render it complex. But often, even that, I believe, was because he cared so much. He cared so much about us all. Stephen was drenched in humanity, persistence, and resilience. Whether in debating the existence of an unobservable multiverse or insisting that it would be possible to make an 8 o'clock meeting in New York on the morning after an evening visit with Desmond Tutu in South Africa, or in bringing together individuals with competing and conflicting viewpoints and perspectives, Stephen found it impossible to superficially engage. Intimacy is not a word often used to describe CEOs, COOs, or CAOs, but for Stephen, intimacy bonded and reaffirmed. He went deep, and often did so that others might rise. He carried within himself a real sense of destiny, a great spiritual hunger, and, I believe, he derived an understanding of his own self through his connections to the world, to all of us. He visited with and thought about those on the margins. How very Jesuit, no? Or, as I would joke with him, how very Jesuit of him. They shared a willfulness and an approach to life despite the differences. So Stephen really felt blessed when, many, many years ago, he found the Jesuits and the Jesuits found him. He was committed to that exceptional relationship, and as Provost, it was his fundamental desire to advance her values and mission. Today, he is a powerful reminder of who we are and also what we can be. The world was surely a better place with Stephen in it. I am grateful for his friendship and will hold him in my heart forever.
העידותי בכם היום את השמיים ואת הארץ. החיים והמוות נתתי לפניך, הברכה והקללה, ובחרת בחיים, למען תחיה, אתה וזרעך. I call heaven and earth to witness against you this day. I have put before you life and death, blessing and curse. Therefore, choose life, so that you may live, you and your seed. It is customary in some Jewish communities to study Torah in memory of someone who has died, and then to share one's textual interpretation with the community as a way to honor and commemorate that person. The practice both signals the centrality of Torah to Jewish life and testifies to the importance of learning to the person who has passed away. I thought it would be fitting, therefore, to build my remarks today from my reading of a single verse from the Torah portion assigned to this week, which is called Nitzavim. On the cusp of the Israelites' entrance into the land of Canaan, and just before his death, Moses exhorts the nation to abide by the terms of their covenant with God, offering up as incentive the stark binaries of life and death, blessing and curse. Classical rabbinic commentaries, reading contextually, typically understand the verse as a summing up of the preceding litany of rewards and punishments consequent to opposing behaviors, and focus their interpretive energy on the multiple possible meanings of the life that's promised should the Israelites choose to obey. But the striking repetition of words in the concluding command, "Choose life so you may live," draws my attention away from context and prompts me to read the phrase not as an admonition about obedience, but as an exhortation about choice. Choose life, do not merely live it, because in order to live, in order to really live, you need actively and consciously to engage life in all its pulsing, frenetic fullness. Stephen Freedman. Sorry. Stephen Freedman opted for life. Though Lord knows, we did our best to beat him up. Even at times, to beat him down. Stephen was always on the side of life, always up for another conversation, another hug, another bottle of rather good wine. "Tell me about you," he would say. "Tell me how you are." Not, "How are you?" the New Yorker's disinterested question. When Stephen opened with "Tell me about you," he actually, astonishingly, wanted to know. And then he would be fully present to your answer, to your concerns and your hopes and your aspirations, fully connected to you, to your life in that moment. Stephen, after all, was an evolutionary biologist, interested professionally in life, in how it changes, how it adapts to its environment, and in how environments can be changed to benefit life. It enlivened him. I really do think that that is the right word. It enlivened him to bring people together, to build, we might say, networks of life, and then see what might evolve when barriers were brought down. Perhaps this is a stretch, but I've thought of his interest in restructuring arts and sciences in precisely these terms, and of his building of Fordham's global connections, too. It is, of course, also true that life can be riotously messy, wayward, if exuberant, in its overflow and growth. And this was characteristic of Stephen, too, as anyone who had meetings with the man surely knows. In my own experience, whether across conference tables or over long private dinners, conversations meandered, ranging widely, moving associatively from their point of origin. To be honest, it was rare for us ever to get through all the things we said at the start we wanted to discuss. Life, his life and mine, would always get in the way. So no matter how much time we spent, there was never enough time to finish. But while it lasted, and is not this like life? While it lasted, there was energy and joy and a world of possibility. By definition, the purpose of a eulogy is to say a good word about a person who has died, to catch some aspect of a person's essence, hold it up for consideration, and then consider how it might ramify for oneself and for others in the future. Stephen's Hebrew name was Moshe Simcha. Moshe is Moses. So I derive my remarks from Moshe's final wish for his people. But I want to draw attention too to Stephen's middle name, Simcha, which is joy or gladness. If Stephen couldn't always find his joy, if there was too much that pressed upon him too often, it is nonetheless true that joy was always there in his essence, prompting his friendships, fueling his aspirations, firing his devotion to life. Uvacharta b'chayim. Therefore, choose life. Let us witness this day that Stephen Freedman chose life, and let that choice be his legacy to us.
I never really had a mentor before I started working in the office of the provost, so I don't have a large sample size as a basis for comparison, but I think it's probably fair to say that Stephen was not a typical mentor. Yes, he gave me feedback about my job performance. He definitely gave me professional advice. Jonathan, when you walk into that room, you need to own it. Or, Jonathan, don't wait to be invited to things, just show up. He gave me a lot of advice. The most valuable thing he told me was pretty simple. Jonathan, you need to be true to yourself, always. He certainly was. And we spent many hours on those black leather couches in his office, eating jelly beans, talking about Fordham, about work, about academic careers. It was hard, not impossible, but hard to get Stephen to talk about himself. Once I asked him, Stephen, what drives you? He thought about it, and then he told me stories about his experiences growing up as a young child in Montreal. That feeling of not fitting in, and how he thought maybe that motivated him to work even harder in order to accomplish more than people expected. I think maybe it also contributed to the empathy and compassion that he brought to everything he did. In fact, the real lessons I learned from Stephen came not so much from his advice, but from watching him interact with people. The way he would totally focus on whomever he was talking to, faculty member, student, security guard, Starbucks barista, anyone. Ask questions about their background, their experiences, their ideas, their opinions, and it wasn't an act. He was genuinely interested in other people. He wanted to hear what they had to say. And as a result, inevitably, he would be late to his next meeting. In the course of these conversations, when Stephen was moved, affected emotionally, he would show it. He would look right into your eyes, tell you with a smile how happy he was for you, or let you know that he could see that you were hurting and ask what he could do to help. He would take your hand and hold it, or hug you. Many times I saw him tear up. He was never embarrassed about these emotional displays. Why should he have been? What's embarrassing about being genuine, about being human, about telling people, showing them that you care about them, even during working hours, even at the office? Stephen was so real, so authentic. Be true to yourself. That's what I learned from him. And that's also how I came to understand what care for the whole person really means. One thing in which I take a lot of comfort is that nothing between us was left unsaid. Stephen knew exactly how much he meant to me. I know this because I told him, most recently at my last annual performance evaluation in June. I don't know if people usually hug their boss at the end of their performance reviews, or tell one another how grateful they are to be working together. Maybe it's common, I don't know. He was not a typical boss. When my mother died 4 years ago, Stephen told me he wanted to attend her funeral in Los Angeles. I said, Stephen, please, you don't have to go to all that trouble, really. It's enough that you offered. His response, oh, I'm gonna be there. He went straight from a Founders Day dinner to the airport and took an overnight flight to California. And the next day when I saw him standing by the gravesite, I fell into his arms and cried. And by the way, I was worried that he wouldn't know anyone there, but after the funeral, all these friends of my mother came up to me and said, oh, your boss introduced himself to me. What a wonderful man. In fact, it turns out we have common friends. Of course, he knew everyone. Everyone. So yes, Stephen made some extraordinary contributions to Jesuit higher education, to international education, to Fordham, etc. But on a more micro level, he changed my life, and I loved him. And I have a feeling that there are 50, 100, 200 people here who could say the same thing. Everywhere he went, he connected with people, brought people together, made people feel good. I feel his presence every day. I hear his voice giving me advice. I hear his words of encouragement, support, telling me to be true to myself, telling me that he's proud of me. He will be with me always until the day I die. And if on that day people feel about me the way that I feel about Stephen, the way that we feel about Stephen, well, I would say that's a life well lived.
My dear friends, this afternoon we gather to celebrate the life and ministry of Dr. Stephen Freedman, a dear friend who served the university with devotion, distinction, and love for 12 years. As we do so, we are blessed by the presence of the members of his family with us, Eileen, Zach and Kate, Noah and Colleen. We're also honored by the presence among us of Rabbi Smith and Stephen's colleagues from the Association of Jesuit Colleges and Universities, otherwise known as AJCU, as well as a delegation of women and men who served as deans under him here at Fordham before they answered the call to serve as academic administrators at other schools around the country. Eileen, Zach, Noah, Kate, Colleen, I want you to take a moment and look around the church. As you do so, you will see that it is crowded with members of the Fordham family, trustees, faculty members, administrators, members of the staff, and those whom Stephen rightly called the heart and center of all we do, students. The presence of such a rich, numerous, and varied congregation bears eloquent testimony to the impact that Stephen had on Fordham and the love that the Fordham community had and has for him. In their presence and on their behalf, I offer to you our deepest condolences and our equally deep thanks for sharing Stephen with us. His legacy here is rich and will continue to influence Fordham for years to come. Moreover, since that influence has been so profound and so broad, as his family knows, today we not only gather for this memorial service, but a few hours ago we dedicated the Provost conference room in his memory. Now, my dear friends, as we all know, Stephen Freedman was a complex man, very complex. And as I wrestled during the summer with the mystery of his death, I kept going back over and over again to a story that he told me in the course of our bi-weekly meetings soon after he arrived at Fordham from Gonzaga University in Spokane. Now, two things at the outset. This story has two forms. With Judith Kubicki, the central figure is a dog. My memory of the story, told over and over again, the central figures were thugs. I'll use my version. Now, I don't honestly know why Stephen shared this story with me, but it was and is so sweet that I'd like to share it with you right now. Stephen told me that when he was a little boy in Montreal, one day he was walking home from school and he found himself confronted by a group of thugs. Now, for me, this was a startling revelation. Thugs in Canada? I didn't think it possible, but I went with the story. He froze as he looked at the thugs in his path. Scared nearly to death, he said. He stood stock still for a few moments as he considered his options. Then, summoning all of his courage, he decided on what he thought was the best course of action. He assumed a confident pose and walked past the thugs singing "Onward, Christian Soldiers." He was happy to report that he arrived home safely and unharmed that afternoon. Now, I'm sure you're wondering why I've shared this story with you. To tell you the truth, I did so because in addition to being such a sweet story that Stephen loved to tell about himself, it's also a story that contains elements of his character, elements that defined him all his life. Fearlessness, clarity of mind, resourcefulness, openness to other cultures and faiths, and remarkable self-knowledge. All who knew him and worked with him saw these qualities or traits in him and in the way that he conducted himself every day. Taken together, they are what made him such an effective administrator, but even more, such a treasured colleague in the ministry of higher education. And let me be very clear on that last point. Stephen saw what he did not as a job. Far from it. Stephen saw what he did as a ministry, and a sacred and transformative ministry at that. Now, rather than trying to provide you with a lengthy narrative to make my point and or to capture who Stephen was for me and for the university, let me provide you with a mosaic of images that bear testimony to the immense, rich, and complex role that he played in our lives, all of which were marked by the fearlessness, clarity of mind, resourcefulness, and openness that showed themselves so wonderfully in his encounter with the strange thugs of Montreal. Loving husband, proud father, doting and fanatic grandfather, dutiful son, evolutionary biologist as excited about the promise of the future as he was at home with the wisdom of the past, a transformational dean, a visionary provost, a theologian of the human encounter, a Jewish scholar who loved and shaped American Jesuit higher education for decades, a man with 2 passports, but really a citizen of the world, United Airlines' best customer, pastor to students, the global educator, peerless mentor, French-Canadian by birth, but New Yorker by adoption, shaker of hands, hugger of donors, of students, hugger of anyone within hugging distance, golden friend, large-hearted, generous of spirit, connoisseur of everything, restless innovator, ecumenist, wise enough to consult, humble enough to listen, confident enough to lead collegially. Democrat with both a capital and lowercase d, thank you. Restless soul. Beijing. Apologist for civility in a fraught age. Lover of souls. Defender of the poor. Blessed with an unerring eye for talent. Champion of the forgotten. Advocate for the underdog. Bridge builder. Scientific and spiritual colleague of Matteo Ricci and Clavius, he claimed they were his brothers. Hawker of dreams. Fan of U2 and to you. Uncomfortable with mediocrity. Pretoria. Sometime fan of the Cubs, sorry John, and perpetual fan of Pope Francis. Globetrotter, world traveler, academic diplomat par excellence, ferocious advocate for the faculty, Fordham basketball fan every season, on a first-name basis with St. Ignatius, spoke Ignatian fluently and from the heart, but with a strange Canadian accent. Loyal to a fault. Starbucks, never understood it. Polymath, unshakable optimist, lived every minute of every day for the greater glory of God. Traveling companion of Francis Xavier. Never met an idea he couldn't play with or an argument he could walk away from. University citizen who achieved greatness by embracing the moment and looking over the horizon at the same time. Savvy Paul, cheerleader for the liberal arts, the pride of the Jesuits, prophetic voice in a chaotic world, dear friend, cherished colleague, wise counselor, Fordham Ram. And this, my friends, is just the beginning of the litany or litanies that we can all recite ourselves. Stephen was the very nearly perfect citizen of the university, and of every university that was blessed by his presence in the course of his long career. From his goodness, we have all received. We were ennobled by his presence, challenged by his dreams, guided by his wisdom, consoled by his love, enriched beyond measure by his friendship. May his memory be eternal. And now in this church where he was so much at home, let us all commend him to the loving mercy of the God whom he served with such constancy all his life. With these slightly altered words from the Roman ritual that he, the Jewish scholar with an Ignatian heart, heard so often. Into your hands, O Father of mercies, we commend our beloved brother Stephen, in the sure and certain hope that with all who have lived virtuous lives of selfless service, he too will enjoy eternal life. Stephen, may the choirs of angels welcome you. May the patriarchs and the prophets and the holy women of Scripture greet you at your coming and bring you in peace to the new and eternal Jerusalem. And with Lazarus, who once was poor, may you have everlasting life. Normally, we end in the Roman Rite with a pious wish that the person whom we're honoring should be at peace. And so normally we would say at this point, be at peace, dear friend. I think it would be better for us to say, stay active, dear friend. Watch over us, guide us, prod us, inspire us. Never be at rest, because you see, Stephen, to be at rest is for Stephen Freedman an impossibility. May God be with us all. May God enjoy Stephen. May God laugh at the stories Stephen tells and listen to the prayers for us that Stephen will utter.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Zach Freedman. Stephen was my dad. My mom will share some words of thanks from our family, but I wanted to quickly express my thanks to Father McShane and to the Fordham community for the dedication of the Freedman Conference Room in my dad's name. My family are grateful that his name will carry on at Fordham in this tangible way. And of course, thank you for everybody here and to those of you streaming in for being a part of this remembrance and celebration of my dad's life. My dad was a special dude. He was full of life. He was distinctive. He was memorable. He was a first-generation college student, an immigrant, an outsider, and an American success story. Stephen Freedman was born April 7th, 1950, to Sam and Sylvia Freedman in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. His father, Sam, was an orphan turned gold-gloved boxer. His mother, a daughter of Polish immigrants, was a dominant figure and most definitely was my dad's number one person. My dad's first language was Yiddish. He was a Jewish boy, but schooled through a public system in Quebec that was through Protestant culture. As Father McShane mentioned, when my dad was worried or anxious as a kid, he would sing to himself, "Onward, Christian Soldier." My dad's mom would not let him play hockey, which you can imagine the social consequences of that in Canada. But he attended many Montreal Canadiens hockey games with his dad. But oddly, both of them hated the Canadiens. When my dad was growing up, his parents owned a gas station and repair shop where my dad's parents, and especially his mom, put in very long hours. My dad and his sister Susan, they didn't see much of their parents and would often have dinner, just the two of them. Wanting badly to help his parents and contribute to the family business, my dad started working at the station when he was 13, pumping gas, cleaning windows, doing whatever he needed to do to be sure clients of their station left happy customers. At this gas station was where my dad first felt the sense of honor and fulfillment associated with hard work and contributing to his family's well-being. From that moment on, for the rest of his life, my dad worked as hard as he could and rarely, if ever, took a break. My dad met my mom when they were 18, undergrads at Loyola College of Montreal. My parents were both biology majors, and they had many classes together. My mom remembers my dad as a loud and pudgy kid who would make his presence known in class. He would always sit in the front and center, ready to spar with their professors. My mom, as a more reserved Irish Catholic girl, found my dad to be obnoxious, and she granted me permission to use that word today. My parents officially met one winter's day during a blizzard on a bus packed with students trying to get home. My mom was already sitting and saw my dad sneaking in the back door of the bus. My mom turned away and thought to herself, "Oh, Stephen, I really hope he doesn't talk to me." But he did, and the rest is history. My parents were friends for 50 years, best friends for 50 years, and married for 44. My parents made each other better people, and they were a team in every essence of the word. My dad often expressed to me that the best days of his life were the days that Noah and I were born. And the worst day of his life was the day his mom, my bubby, died. Like my dad, she also died suddenly, unexpectedly, and way too young, in 1989 at the age of 60. My dad was 39, I was 6, and Noah was 3. For my dad, the experience of unexpectedly and prematurely losing his mom, his center of gravity, has shaped much of his adult life. Through the journey of grieving his mom's death, solidified in him a sense that our time on earth, it's finite and too short, and that life is precious and should be experienced and enjoyed to the fullest extent. For my dad, the most precious of time was time spent with our nuclear family. Growing up, my dad always seemed to have all the time in the world for his sons, Noah and me. He did all the things great dads do. He led endless games of Simon Says, Red Light, Green Light, and Duck, Duck, Goose. He coached both Noah and my teams in youth hockey. He played ball hockey with us in our basement. He never missed one of our games. Sometimes my dad would take Noah and me into work, where we'd play with an actual skeleton in the closet. We'd draw on the chalkboard. We'd explore around the teaching labs or play in the campus gym. We had our regular outings. In Chicago, on nice days, we'd bike down the lakefront to downtown Chicago for lunch and a stroll. Later, in the Spokane years, we'd go for hikes or hit the ski slopes in Idaho and Montana, and would catch every Gonzaga basketball game that we could. In fact, my dad would sometimes get in the line for faculty tickets at 5 a.m. to be sure that we would get into even the biggest games. Growing up, Noah and I, we'd especially look forward to his super fun days. Or as my dad would say with this characteristic intensity, "You guys ready for the super fun day?" In these super fun days, my dad would plan a whole day of fun for the 3 Freedman boys. We'd go to Chuck E. Cheese, play mini golf, later on real golf, go go-karting, fishing, drive-in movies, Blackhawks games, Cubs games, and even a WWF wrestling event. 2.5 years ago, my dad invited Noah and me what would be our last super fun day and really a super fun week when he invited us to tag along on a work trip to Beijing. He was so proud to show us around that ancient city that he had gotten to know and love over the years. When our time in Beijing was coming to a close back at the airport, we were being reminded that it was time to board our respective flights home. We caught eyes, didn't exchange words, but we knew that the shared experience of a 60-something-year-old dad tooling around Beijing with his 30-something-year-old sons, that was it. It was the final super fun day. Something that never happened again. And we had a good group hug and a good group cry. My dad was just a few months into his 69th year when he died. And like his mom, he died too soon. If there's any comfort to be sought in my dad's premature death, it's that he most definitely lived life to the fullest. He gave it everything that he had. In doing so, my dad naturally and effortlessly embodied several Jesuit values that we've heard about today. Cura personalis, care of the whole person. Women and men for others, and my dad was always ready and eager to help another. But I would argue most of all, my dad embodied magis, or simply more. Striving for the better, striving for excellence. No matter what, big or small, my dad was always striving to do more, to maximize. No secret, I'm sure it's no secret to anyone here, but my dad never ran out of energy. There was never a dull moment with my dad around. Many people have asked, how did he do it? And I have no idea. For example, I thought a normal day on the ski slope was arriving just when the lifts were opening and then skiing up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down until the last lift of the day when it felt like your legs are going to fall off. That, to me, was normal. Lunch breaks were for the weak. One of my dad's favorite sayings was, you don't ask, you don't get. And my dad never shied away from asking for what he wanted to maximize a situation. Despite driving us and others crazy on occasion, my dad saw this as a labor of love, and he clearly always wanted the best for everybody. This trait was on full display on my wedding day. I arrived at our hotel with my parents, and my dad, being my dad, he wanted to be sure he could do whatever he could to ensure that my soon-to-be wife, Kate, and I had the best room possible to spend our wedding night. After peppering the front desk agent with questions about the pros and cons of available rooms, this fellow gave my dad the keys to 3 rooms that he said were the best that they had to offer. Before I knew it, I was on a reconnaissance mission with my family at the Hilton Rybrook. And in those 3 rooms, my dad channeled his collective knowledge of 40 years of work travel, checking every nook and cranny of each room to determine the best room for my wedding night. I appreciated it. Of course, I kind of saw it coming, but I still wanted to crawl into a corner and make it stop. But my dad is a maximizer. From as early as I can remember, I wanted to get my PhD and become a professor. Why? Because from what I saw through my dad, being a professor means you get to travel to interesting places, spend your days on a college campus, which I thought were magical places. And most importantly, it allows you to spend a lot of time with your family. And what more could you want in a job? I now realize, being an assistant professor myself, that finding the right work-life balance is incredibly difficult, near impossible. But my dad made this challenging task seem easy. As I embarked on the academic career path, my dad was not only my dad, but my professional mentor and role model. I'm thankful that my dad helped me develop a positive relationship with criticism. As an undergrad, I was an undergraduate research assistant for 2 summers at Gonzaga. The night before I was to present my summer's findings to the biology department, I did a dry run for my dad of what I thought was a solid presentation. When I finished, my dad simply said, "That wasn't very good, You can do better." He then worked with me for hours, helping me understand how to better craft my presentation, and my presentation was better for it. He never doubted my dad had my back or my best interests at heart, but he never shied away from being bluntly honest with me. My dad had a knack for delivering critical opinion in a loving and supportive way. He criticized but never made me feel that I wasn't good enough, that I wasn't living up to his expectations. My dad was also my secret weapon against imposter syndrome, or feeling like you can't do it or don't belong. Ironically enough, my dad had a heavy dose of imposter syndrome. He truly believed that the only way he'd stand a chance in a job was to work as hard as he could, to outwork his peers. Of Of course, I eventually realized my dad's feelings were far from the truth. But what my dad taught me through his own self-doubt is to focus what I can control. My work ethic. Okay, when I was in the doldrums of the 5th year of my PhD, I would think to myself, just keep at it. If my dad could do it, I can do it. Hey, work harder. After a couple of unsuccessful years on the job market as a postdoc, I thought, just keep at it. I'll land a job. If my dad could do it, I can do it. Dig deeper. Hey, in the fullest sense of the saying, I would not be where I am today, if not for my dad. To close, there are 2 major life lessons that my dad strived to ingrain in Noah and myself. One is to strive to be the best we can in everything that we do. Okay, that we can't control many things in life, but we can control our effort, and we should give it everything that we have, okay, and help as many people as we can along the way. The other would be to simply enjoy life to the absolute fullest extent. Okay, it's a miracle that we're all alive right now. We're the result of billions upon billions of chance occurrences in the universe. Okay, life is a miracle, but it's also too short. Say yes to opportunities, make memories. My dad was a special dude. I feel lucky that nearly every time a friend or acquaintance of mine met my dad, they would tell me, "Dude, your dad's awesome." And I'd say, "I know." I feel lucky that while I can't actually speak to my dad anymore, I've talked with him a lot, and I have a pretty good idea what he'd say back. I feel lucky that my dad got to dance at my wedding and meet his grandson, Aaron John, and even make him giggle. And most of all, I feel lucky that I genuinely enjoyed spending time with my dad, and I knew that he genuinely enjoyed spending time with me. I know my dad was proud of me, and I know that he knew I was proud of him. I feel lucky that I was born into this world with Stephen Freedman as my dad, a one-of-a-kind, amazing, inspiring man. It doesn't get much better than that. Right now, I'd like to invite up my mom, Eileen Shore, who'd like to share some words of her own.
Good afternoon, everyone. Over the past difficult weeks since Stephen died, our family's been fortunate to be blessed with many moments of grace in the midst of our sadness. We've been deeply touched by expressions of love and support from our families, from friends, and from Stephen's colleagues here and throughout the world. I wanted to let you know how grateful we are for this support and for the personal memories of Stephen that many of you have shared with us. I would like to express our profound appreciation to everyone who is with us today to mourn the loss and celebrate the life of a man about whom a colleague wrote, "Stephen was a mensch, and while he wasn't perfect, he was surely perfectible and always striving toward that goal." I would like to express our deep gratitude to Father McShane, who has shown his care and concern for our small family and for the broader Fordham family in many ways, but especially today, in providing this opportunity for all of us to come together to share both our sadness at Stephen's loss and memories of his time at Fordham. Many thanks as well to the President's Office and to Campus Ministries for coordinating this day. I know a great many people worked very hard to make this day of remembrance so meaningful and so full of love, and I would like to express our gratitude to them, and particularly to Father McCarthy, for whose kindness and sensitivity we're especially thankful. Many thanks to Jonathan, Ellen, Eve, Eva, and John for sharing their own personal memories of Stephen. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank Diane Cuomo, whose skill at organizing and attention to detail made Stephen's life so much easier, as well as to the dedicated team in the office of the Provost, without whose hard work Stephen would not have been able to do all that he did. Finally, I don't really have words to describe what a gift it is that Eleanor Smith is here today. Eleanor and Stephen had a special connection that transcended time and distance. We're most grateful that Eleanor is with us to help us say our goodbyes.
Thank you to everybody for the verbal gifts of your heart and memories. Thank you, Eileen. I'm honored beyond my ability to express to be here with you today. We live in a time when there is a hard drift toward the most narrow versions of our respective identities. That we gather today as a community in a space that is holy to Christians and to Stephen, and bless Stephen's name with the Hebrew and Aramaic prayers of his tradition, is his last gift and inspiration to all of us. A reminder that our way forward in grace lies in the open mind, the shared table, a tolerance for the less familiar, and the dogged search for what unites us to carry us forward in wholeness. Pardon me. On the 8th day of life, a Jewish child is welcomed into the covenant with a prayer that the life of this child be distinguished by 3 things: a life of Torah, chuppah, and ma'asim tovim, a life of learning and Jewish practice and identity, a loving partnership worthy of God's blessing, and a habit of generous acts, good deeds. In his 68 years, Stephen Freedman more than fulfilled the vision that was likely intoned over his infant self, and in that hour, on the 8th day of his life, he was blessed with the name Moshe Simcha, as Dr. Keller mentioned. The first Moses is not only honored with the moniker of our teacher, Moshe Rabbeinu, he was also seen as the model of humility in the Hebrew Bible and Jewish tradition. Stephen's second name, Simcha, as we heard, means joy, and this is so right too. In a moment, we will all rise and ask our Creator to now look after Stephen, our wise and joyful teacher, devoted husband and father, with the same tenderness and care that he showed to all of us. In the Talmud, our rabbi's vision of the world to come is a grand academy, the great yeshiva of the world beyond, where the days are spent learning and debating the meaning of existence while dining on pickled leviathan. Stephen's days in the academy and in our hearts are forever. I invite you please to rise as you are able. El Malei Rachamim Shochen Bamrumim Hametzei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei HaShechina Im Kedoshim Utehorim Kezohar Harakia Mazirim Et Nishmat Moshe Simcha Ben Shmuel V'Sara שהלך לעולמו. בעל הרחמים, יסתירהו בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתו. אדוני הוא נחלתו, וינוח בשלום על משכבו, ונאמר אמן. Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant a perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Stephen Freedman, Moshe Simcha, son of Shmuel and Sarah, who has entered eternity. God of mercy, let him find refuge in the shadow of your wings, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God be his inheritance. May he rest with you in peace, and together we say, Amen. We join together now in the words of the mourner's Kaddish, which are in your books. The words are there in the Aramaic and also transliterated. Please feel free to join if you wish. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, b'alma divrach yirutei v'amlich malchutei, b'yechon u'yomechon v'chai d'chol beit Yisrael, ba'agalau v'zman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam olamei omaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitrumam v'yitnasei, v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalel shemei d'kudusha brichu, Leila min kol birchata v'shirata, tush bechata v'nechemata, damiran be'alma v'imru, amen. Yehei shlam rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru, amen. Osei shalom b'mromav, hu ya'asei shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru, amen. Osei shalom, 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 Bimromav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'yimeru, amen. May God grant peace to those who mourn and comfort to all the bereaved among us. This formally concludes our service of memory, love, and celebration. We thank you again for coming. Here at Rose Hill, we invite you to join us on the second floor of the McGinley Center, where there will be a reception and also an opportunity to sign the guest book if you have no longer had the opportunity to do that. At Lincoln Center in Westchester and in London, university staff is present to direct you to the receptions at that location. I thank you again for attending today's service of remembrance. I invite you to please stay in your seats as our deans exit the stage and the family follows behind on our way to the reception.